Hey everybody, permit me start this video with a question. Will the Russian president's visit to China be the beginning of the end for the Ukraine war? Let me bring you guys up to speed. So the Russian President Vladimir Putin is currently in China on his first state visit since being sworn in as president of Russia. Well, it might feel like any other random visit by a head of state to China, but this visit means so much more than that. As we all know, whenever Russia and China meet, it's bound to make headlines, especially with the tensions that these two countries have with the West. Now, the truth is that this meeting in Beijing definitely puts all eyes on both leaders because due to all the multiple tensions and with the way the United States is currently experiencing so much turmoil worldwide, like just look at Africa for example, where there are tensions between Russian and US troops in Niger and US troops have been asked to leave. I'll make a video on that very soon, so if you want to see that, subscribe to this channel and stay tuned. Coupled with the situation here in Asia and of course across Europe, with China trying to take over and of course with China still producing so much. And now when we look at the cooperation between China and Russia, it seems very dangerous for the United States, who has been trying to limit China's might in the technological sector and of course in China's overproduction, which they have been trying to limit. But the question now is, how will the US and the EU control China and Russia? Will it be that easy? How will they succeed? We have already seen multiple sanctions being placed on China and Russia consecutively, but nothing seems to have changed. Instead, it has brought China and Russia much closer. And of course, China and Russia are not just coming closer together, they are bringing other nations together. Many African nations, including many countries in the global south. So I think the future is looking very bleak for the West. Now, with many issues currently on the table, like the Russia-Ukraine war, the issues in the Asia-Pacific, alongside multiple sanctions on Russia and China by the USA, and of course threats from NATO, especially with NATO recently carrying out one of their biggest training sessions and preparations since the Cold War. Now, both presidents during this meeting in Beijing have agreed to deepen ties, which might seem to be at the expense of the United States' pressure. And as we all know, both China and Russia have been receiving back-to-back sanctions from the West for many different reasons, of course being championed by the United States, which is definitely affecting both countries, that is Russia and China. So maybe at this point we can say it's like the enemy of my enemy, like Russia and China versus the G7. So I believe that's the reason why China and Russia have come together to build an even stronger friendship. Now, during this important meeting between both presidents, there were quite a number of issues that were being discussed according to multiple news outlets, that is from the peace in Ukraine to their relationship with the United States, which they both have in common, through economy, agriculture, and even the Taiwan issue. And of course, we'll try to look at a few of those points right now. Firstly, regarding the war in Ukraine, the US has always pressured China not to supply Russia any key components or any military equipment that can be used for weapons production, and for Chinese companies to cut ties to Russia and not assist in any sector that might support Russia's war efforts against Ukraine. And this was made known especially during the recent visit of the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to China. And of course, right after that visit, there have been multiple sanctions on Chinese companies who have ties to Russia, probably supplying equipment that can be used for weapons against Ukraine. But then, as we all know guys, China has always emphasized on a neutral position in the Russia-Ukraine war and has always tried to bring peace between both countries. So during the meeting in Beijing, both presidents have agreed to look into the root causes of the Ukraine war for a sustainable settlement of the crisis, with President Putin appreciating China's efforts and the initiative to regulate the situation.
Безусловно, я со своей стороны проинформирую председателя Китайской Народной Республики о ситуации, которая складывается вокруг украинского кризиса. Мы признательны китайским друзьям, коллегам за те инициативы, которые они выдвигают по урегулированию этой проблемы.
And it should be recorded back in 2023, China proposed a general peace plan and called for a ceasefire and direct talks between Russia and Ukraine. But sadly, this plan was rejected by both Ukraine and the West for failing to call for Russia to leave all the occupied parts of Ukraine. Now, in this case, millennials, we can only hope that there can finally be an amicable agreement between both parties involved, that is Russia and Ukraine, to be able to stop the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. And as Putin said in an interview with Chinese media before his current visit to China, that the Kremlin was very prepared to negotiate over the conflict in Ukraine. And according to a professor who researches on Chinese foreign policy at Singapore's Nanyang Technological University, Ho Tiangbon, through AP News, he believes that both sides want to show that despite the pressure that both sides are facing from the US, both sides are not about to turn their backs on each other anytime soon. And I feel that this is quite dangerous for the United States, because the more sanctions and troubles and control or pressure the United States puts on both countries, it only seems to draw them closer and even helps Russia and China to be able to make more friends globally. And guys, like I mentioned before, this scenario right now is clearly the situation of the enemy of my enemy, which definitely makes the person my friend. Because the truth is that the world right now seems to clearly be divided, and no sovereign nation can be an island. Every country needs to have a friend. It seems like your strength definitely depends on who you align with, because standing alone can be fatal for your nation. Reason why I believe that this Putin's trip to China is a very critical one, to show that the relationship with China is one of strength, and as they have always called each other old friends. But despite President Xi's relationship with Russia, he still clearly stated that China hopes for an early return of Europe to peace and stability, and will continue to play a constructive role towards this. As we all know, President Xi Jinping recently made a very important visit to Europe, where he met many European leaders and was very strategic in his visit, which I believe one of the reasons why he made this very important trip to Europe was to create more reasonable ties with the European Union and try to de-escalate tensions that have been reigning for quite a while now. So looking critically at Vladimir Putin's visit to China right now, I think it's sending a strong message to the West, telling them that they have a strong ally, that China and Russia are getting stronger together, and not just these two countries, they are getting other countries to go along with them. And you know, when it comes to geopolitics, it's about who you align yourself with, it's about who you can make friends with. And when we look at the kind of relationship that China and Russia have built together over the years, it is definitely one that is causing fear in the West. And at this point, I think Western powers seem to be running out of options or ideas on how to contain China and Russia. Will they place more sanctions? Will they place more tariffs? Or will the West keep funding countries against Russia and China? How will all this play out? Now guys, as I've mentioned before, it has become very clear that the world and global powers are clearly divided, especially with the BRICS coming up really strong, and of course getting championed by China and Russia, pushing hard for its success, as opposed to the G7 still doing their best to maintain global control and order, as it has always been. But lately, it's seemingly very difficult to maintain that global hegemony for the G7. So I believe Russia's stronger ties and relationship with China only goes to show more cooperation against the G7, which can clearly be seen in sectors like China's increased trade with Russia, which amounted to over $240 billion just last year. And of course, this has been very helpful for Russia to counter most of the US and EU sanctions that had been placed on Russia over the years. And of course, it has really helped Russia to stay afloat despite all these multiple sanctions. Meanwhile, Russia on its part has been diverting most of its energy products towards China, which clearly shows a really good relationship between the two countries, because now they do more trade and more cooperation together. Well, no one's talking about this, but I have to ask this question. Is there any room for peace? Is there a possibility that the West and the global South, including China and Russia of course, can come together for global good? I think all the efforts that have been put into wars can definitely be put into creating peace. Of course, it's going to take a while. It's not as easy as we might think. But then, the efforts that they are making to create the wars, I think they can make the same efforts to bring peace. Hopefully, all this works out. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell to stay updated as soon as I get latest information for you. Thank you so much for watching this video. Remember, this is Willene. See you next time.